There is a mountain range in northern Arizona that the Hopi have watched for longer than anyone can measure. From the high mesas where they live, they can see it on the horizon, standing alone above the desert, its highest peaks holding snow long after the land below has gone dry. To most people who pass it today, it is simply a scenic range near a highway. But to the Hopi, it is one of the most important places in the world. Because according to their tradition, that mountain is not empty. It is where the beings live. And for part of every year, those beings come down from the peaks and walk among the people. The Hopi call them the Katsineim. In English, they are usually written as the Kachinas, and they are not gods in the way outsiders often assume, and not simply costumes or dancers either, though that is how a passing tourist might describe what they see. The tradition is far stranger and far older than that. The Hopi say the Kachinas are real beings, that they come from the mountains and from the world below, that they arrive at a certain time of year, that they bring something the people cannot survive without, and that at the end of the season they leave again, returning to the peaks until they are needed once more. For centuries, this was known only to the Hopi. Then, anthropologists began writing it down, and what they recorded did not sound like a simple harvest festival. It sounded like the record of a visitation. To understand why, we have to begin long before the researchers arrived. The Hopi are among the oldest continuously living peoples in North America. Their villages on the mesas have been occupied for centuries, and their understanding of the world reaches back through a tradition of earlier worlds, of migrations, and of instructions given to them at the beginning about how they were meant to live. Survival in that high desert country was never guaranteed. Rain was everything. Without it, the corn failed. And without the corn, the people did not eat. And so the single most important thing in the Hopi world was water falling from the sky at the right time. That is where the Kachinas come in, because in the tradition, the Kachinas are tied directly to the rain, to the clouds, to the forces that decide whether a people live or die in a land with almost no water. They are described as beings who carry the rain, who bring the clouds, who intercede between the people and the sky, and their home, the place they come from and return to, is the mountain range on the horizon, the peaks the Hopi hold as sacred. Before we go further, if you are drawn to the beliefs that sit at the edge of what we can explain, the places where a people insist that something real once walked among them, consider subscribing. It genuinely helps this channel keep investigating stories like this one, because the Hopi did not describe the Kachinas in vague terms. They described a cycle, an arrival, a presence, and a departure, and they described what the beings looked like when they came. According to the tradition, the Kachinas arrive at a particular point in the year, around the winter solstice, and they remain among the people through the growing season until around midsummer. During that time, they are present in the villages. They take part in the ceremonies. They are seen, and the descriptions of them are specific. They appear with masked faces, with markings and forms, unlike ordinary people. Each type of Kachina distinct, each with its own appearance, its own role, its own meaning. There are said to be a great many of them, hundreds of distinct kinds, each one a different being with a different purpose. And they are remembered not as a single spirit, but as a whole population, an entire order of beings who belong to the mountains and the world below, rather than to the villages of the people. Then, at the end of the season, in a ceremony that marks the turning of the year, the Kachinas depart. The tradition describes them leaving the villages and returning home, back to the peaks, back to the place they came from, where they remain until the cycle brings them down again. The people are left to bring in the harvest the rains made possible, and the mountain waits on the horizon until the next arrival. Now, an outsider hearing this for the first time will reach immediately for the obvious explanation. These are ceremonies. The masked figures are members of the community taking on ritual roles. This is religion, expressed through performance, the way religions everywhere use ritual and symbol. And that explanation is not wrong. Anthropologists have studied Hopi ceremony for well over a century and have documented exactly that. One of the richest and most complex ceremonial traditions on the continent. But here is what makes it more difficult than it first appears. The Hopi themselves do not describe the Kachinas as mere symbols. Within the tradition, the beings are understood as real. The relationship is understood as real. The arrival and the departure are understood as real events, not theatrical reenactments of an idea. To the people who hold the tradition, something genuinely comes and genuinely goes, and the tradition insists this has always been so, going back to a time when, the accounts say, the Kachinas did not merely visit but lived among the people directly, before something changed and they withdrew to the mountains, returning only for part of each year. That detail is the one that lingers, because it describes not a symbol invented to explain the rain, but a memory of a time when the beings were present all the time, and of a separation, after which they could only be reached for part of the year, from a specific place on the horizon. Then, researchers noticed where that place actually is. The mountains the Hopi tie to the Kachinas are real, and they are not vague. They are a specific range, visible from the mesas, standing far higher than the surrounding land, catching snow and cloud when everything below is dry. In a desert, a high mountain is where the clouds gather. It is where the rain is born. It is, in the most literal physical sense, the place the water comes from. The Hopi located the home of the rain-bringing beings at precisely the point on the landscape where, in reality, the rain does begin. Where the moisture rises, the clouds form, and the storms roll down onto the mesas below. That is not a coincidence a people stumble into by accident. It is a tradition built on a deep, accurate observation of how their world actually works, wrapped around beings the Hopi insist are real. The science of where desert rain comes from, and the tradition of where the Kachinas live, point at the same mountain. And that raises the same uncomfortable question that runs through so much of Hopi tradition. Is this a symbolic story that happens to line up with the physical world? Or is it a record, carried across centuries, of something the ancestors genuinely experienced, dressed in the language of the sacred? The tradition itself does not treat the two as separate. To the Hopi, the beings and the rain are not two different things, one real and one symbolic. They are one thing. The Kachinas come, and the rain comes with them. The Kachinas leave, and the season closes. The mountain is both a physical peak and the home of the beings. In the Hopi understanding, there is no line between the natural and the spiritual. And that is exactly what makes the tradition so hard for an outside observer to categorize. It refuses to be filed as either pure myth or pure meteorology. This becomes even harder to dismiss when you consider how carefully the tradition was preserved. The Kachina cycle is not a loose collection of stories. It is a precise calendar, tied to the solstices, to the movement of the year, to specific ceremonies performed at specific times, held by specific clans and societies with specific responsibilities. It carried obligations. It carried knowledge that had to be passed on exactly. This is the structure of something a people believed they were participating in, not merely remembering, a living relationship with beings who were expected to arrive, and did. More than a century after anthropologists first began recording the tradition, the Kachinas have never been fully explained by outsiders. and they have never gone away. Researchers continue to study Hopi ceremony as one of the most sophisticated religious systems in North America. Many Hopi continue to regard the Kachinas as real and the mountains as sacred. And that belief has consequences in the present, not only in the past. Because the mountain range the Hopi hold as the home of the Kachinas is real land, and in the modern world, real land is used for other things. Over the past decades, there have been genuine, documented legal battles over that range, over development on it, over uses the Hopi and other tribes consider a desecration of a sacred place. Those disputes reached the courts. They were reported. They are part of the public record. And at the heart of them was the Hopi position, stated plainly that this mountain is not an ordinary peak but the home of the beings, and that treating it as ordinary land does damage to something the Hopi have protected for centuries. That is worth sitting with. This is not a belief confined to old books and quiet ceremonies. It is a belief the Hopi have defended in the modern world, in modern courtrooms, against modern development, because to them the mountain genuinely is what the tradition says it is. So what did the Hopi see in the Kachinas that came down from the peaks? We can say what is certain. The mountain is real and sacred to the Hopi, and it is genuinely where the rain gathers in that desert country. The Kachina tradition is real, one of the most complex and best documented ceremonial systems on the continent, tied to a precise seasonal cycle of arrival and departure. The beings are described in detail as a whole population of distinct kinds, each with its own form and role. And the tradition holds plainly that these are not symbols, but real beings, who once lived among the people, and now return from the mountains for part of each year. What we cannot say is what that means. Whether the Kachinas are a religious understanding of the natural forces the Hopi depended on, expressed through the language of beings and visitation. Whether they are the memory of something the ancestors genuinely encountered, so old that its origin has passed beyond recovery, or whether they are exactly what the Hopi say they are, real beings who come down from the peaks and whose reality simply does not fit the categories an outsider brings to it. History rarely resolves questions like this, and it would be dishonest to pretend it can. A skeptic can look at the Kachina tradition and see a magnificent religious response to the terror of drought, and that reading is reasonable and may be right. But the people to whom the tradition belongs have never described it that way. They describe an arrival. They describe a presence. They describe a departure. And they describe a mountain on the horizon that is not empty. The Hopi have never claimed to explain the Kachinas to the satisfaction of outsiders, and they have never needed to. What they have held across centuries is a relationship with beings they say come down from the peaks when the year turns, who bring the rain the people cannot live without, who walk among them through the season, and who return to the mountain when their work is done. Whether that is myth, memory, or something that still does not fit our understanding of the world, is a question each of us has to weigh for ourselves. What cannot be argued is that the Hopi have watched that mountain for longer than the country around it has existed, that they have defended it as sacred into the present day, and that they have always said the same thing about it, that something lives up there, and that for part of every year it comes down. Thank you for watching. If you are drawn to the beliefs that sit right at the edge of what we can explain, the places where a people insists that something real once walked among them, consider subscribing. It is what allows this channel to keep investigating stories like this one. And before you go, I would like to hear from you. Do you think the Kachinas are a symbolic understanding of the rain and the mountains? Or could they preserve the memory of something the Hopi ancestors genuinely experienced? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you in the next one.